Story number 1. My buddy Mark and I, we were itching to get out of the city. Just needed some space, some quiet, away from all the noise. We decided on a camping trip up in the mountains, a place we'd been talking about for a while. There was this old forest access road that was barely used, and at the end of it, a really pretty waterfall. Sounded perfect, secluded, private, exactly what we needed. We packed up my old beat-up truck with gear, food, fishing rods, everything. The drive out was long, winding through forgotten towns and then onto gravel roads that kicked up a dust cloud behind us. Eventually, we found the turnoff for the forest road. It was narrow, overgrown, and a lot rougher than I remembered. About a mile in, almost hidden by thick brush, we saw it. A wooden sign, old and faded, leaning against a rotting tree. It just said, "Private property." The paint was peeling, and it looked like it had been there for a long, long time. Mark looked at it, then at me. "Think we're crossing a line?" he asked. I shrugged. "Nah, it's way off the main road, probably some old logging company sign or something. We're going deep into the national forest, past where anyone would even care. Plus, that waterfall isn't on private land." We figured we were far enough out, far enough past any real boundaries, that it didn't matter. We weren't going to bother anyone, just set up camp by the waterfall, do some fishing, and leave no trace. So we pushed on, bouncing along the rocky track until we got to the small clearing near the waterfall. The spot was awesome. The waterfall roared, a steady, calming sound. The air was fresh, smelling of pine and damp earth. We quickly set up our tent, got a fire pit cleared, and started gathering wood. It was late afternoon, and the light was starting to fade. We worked fast, wanting to get everything ready before dark. We cooked some hot dogs over the fire, laughing, feeling good about being out there. As night fully settled in, it got really dark. The kind of dark you only get out in the deep woods, where the stars are just insane, like spilled diamonds on black velvet. We were sitting by the fire, talking, sipping on some lukewarm beers. The sound of the waterfall was constant, a low rumble. Then, I heard it, a low, distant hum, almost too faint to make out over the waterfall. "You hear that?" I asked Mark. He tilted his head, listening. "Hear what?" "Like an engine?" It got a little clearer, a low, throaty rumble, like a four-wheeler, and it was moving, slowly, through the trees. My eyes narrowed, trying to peer into the inky blackness beyond our firelight. "Someone's out here?" Mark murmured. "Thought this road was closed." The sound continued. It wasn't coming directly towards us, but it was definitely circling. A wide, slow circle, out in the darkness. And what was really weird was, there were no lights. No headlights cutting through the trees, no faint glow. Just the sound of the engine, barely audible, making its slow, deliberate pass. It circled for what felt like 10, 15 minutes. Just a low hum, always moving, always out of sight. It was like whoever it was, they didn't want to be seen. Or they didn't want to signal they were there. It was just an unsettling presence, out in the dark. "Maybe it's a ranger?" Mark offered, but his voice sounded a bit strained. "Rangers usually have lights," I said, and we both knew it. This wasn't normal. We kept quiet, listening. The laughter gone. The low rumble finally faded away, heading back the way we came. We didn't hear it again that night. We stayed up for a little while longer, talking in hushed tones, both feeling a bit uneasy now. Eventually, we zipped up our tent and tried to sleep. I kept waking up, listening. But it was just the waterfall and the night sounds. The next morning, we tried to shake it off. "Just some local kid joyriding," Mark said, but he didn't sound convinced. We spent the day fishing in the stream, hiked up to the top of the waterfall, just enjoying the wilderness. The sun was warm, and the uneasy feeling from the night before started to fade. We caught a few small fish, nothing big enough to keep, but it was a good day. We headed back to camp as the sun started to dip low again. We walked into the clearing, laughing about something stupid, Mark said. We stopped dead. Our tent. It was different. It was definitely our tent, same color, same poles, but it was angled slightly. Before, the door had faced the waterfall. Now it was turned a few degrees to the left, facing deeper into the woods. Just a little bit, not a lot, but enough that it was obvious it had been moved. Mark walked over to it slowly, his face grim. He ran his hand over the fabric. "You move it?" he asked. "No, you?" "No way." We looked around the camp. Nothing else seemed out of place. Our cooler was still there, the fire pit was just as we left it. But the tent had been moved. Someone had been here, while we were gone, and they had subtly messed with our stuff. "Check everything," I said, my voice low. We unzipped the tent. Nothing was missing inside. Our sleeping bags, our backpacks, all there. We checked the cooler. Food still there. But the feeling was back, heavier than before. Someone had been watching us, and they were sending a message. "We need to set up the trail cam," Mark said, pulling a small, camouflage-colored camera from his pack. We usually used it for wildlife, but now it felt like a necessity. We strapped it to a sturdy tree, angled towards the clearing, hoping to catch whoever was messing with us. We tried to act normal, building a fire, cooking dinner, but we kept glancing into the trees. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of eyes. The second night was worse. The four-wheeler came back. Same slow, silent circling. This time, it felt closer. We could almost feel the vibration through the ground, even over the waterfall. It circled and circled for a long time. We sat absolutely still by the fire, barely breathing. It felt like a hunter sizing up its prey, and we were the prey. When the sound finally faded, we stayed awake for hours, too scared to sleep. We kept our knives ready, just in case, but nothing else happened. The next morning, we woke up, exhausted. Mark got up first, went to check the trail cam. He came back, his face pale. "It's gone," he said, holding up the empty straps that had held the camera to the tree. "They took it." My stomach dropped. They knew about the camera. They knew we were trying to see them. They were smart, and they were playing a game. "Did they leave anything?" I asked, thinking of the moved tent. Mark pointed to a flat, gray rock near where the camera had been. Sitting on top of it, perfectly placed, was a cigarette. Not a full pack, not a butt they dropped. Just a single, fresh, unlit cigarette. It wasn't a brand I recognized. It was a clear message. A calling card. "We were here. We know you're here. We took your camera." We looked at each other. The fun was gone. The relaxation was gone. This wasn't just someone messing with us. This felt deliberate, threatening. We decided to pack up, get out, right then. No more fishing, no more relaxing. This place felt poisoned. We started stuffing our gear into our bags, working quickly, not talking much. We felt exposed, watched. As we were breaking down the tent, Mark yelled, "My cooler, it's gone!" We looked around. He was right. The big white cooler, filled with our remaining food and drinks, was gone. Just vanished. No tracks around where it had been. No dragging marks. Nothing. And then I looked at the ground around our fire pit, where our boots had been walking all day, leaving clear prints in the soft earth. Nothing. The ground was smooth. Like someone had taken a broom and carefully, meticulously swept away every single one of our footprints, all around the camp. They had erased our presence, except for the cigarette, and the moved tent, and the missing cooler. A cold, raw fear settled deep in my bones. This wasn't a random act. This was planned. Someone was here, watching us, waiting. They had been toying with us, and now they were escalating, taking our things, erasing our marks. It was like they were slowly tightening a noose. "Get in the truck," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Now." We threw the last of our stuff into the truck, not bothering to organize anything. We just needed to go. I jumped into the driver's seat, Mark into the passenger. I started the engine, slammed it into reverse, and peeled out of the clearing, tires spitting gravel. We didn't look back. We just drove, fast, down the bumpy, winding forest road. My heart was pounding, a drumbeat against my ribs. I glanced at Mark. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He was clutching his knife. We finally reached the faded private property sign. I didn't slow down. We blew right past it, onto the slightly less rough gravel road. And then, as we drove past the old oak tree, where the faded sign had been leaning, I saw something new. Nailed to the tree, fresh and raw, was another piece of wood. It was newer than the faded sign, the wood still light-colored. And on it, hammered in with rusty nails, were words painted in stark, black letters: "New paint, fresh paint. Next time you won't leave." My foot almost slipped off the gas pedal. I stared at it in my rear-view mirror as we sped past. It was a direct threat. They had been watching us leave. They knew we were bailing. And they were telling us exactly what would happen if we ever came back. We drove for hours, not stopping, not talking, just the hum of the engine and the thumping of our hearts. The sun was fully up now, but the warmth did nothing to thaw the ice that had formed in my chest. We pulled into a gas station in a small town, miles and miles away from that forest road, and just sat there for a long time, catching our breath. We never went back to that waterfall, or that part of the woods, and we never talked about it much after that day either. What could you even say? We ran into someone's land, someone who didn't want us there, and they made it terrifyingly clear. They weren't ghosts or monsters. They were just people, and that made it even worse. The thought of those eyes watching us from the darkness, the silent circling, the deliberate messages, it still makes my skin crawl. We learned our lesson the hard way. Some property lines are more than just a faded sign. Story number 2. I was camping alone near a state park in Kentucky, mid-October. The leaves were turning, reds and yellows exploding all over the hillsides, and the air was crisp. It was the perfect time of year for a solo trip, before it got too cold. I liked being out there by myself. No distractions, just the quiet of the woods. I'd picked a spot pretty deep into the backcountry, a good few miles from the main trail, near a small stream. Figured I'd have the whole place to myself. I set up my tent, got a small fire going, and just breathed in the clean air. It felt good, really good. I spent the first day hiking around, exploring, enjoying the solitude. I didn't see another soul, just deer tracks and the occasional bird. I felt completely at peace. Later that afternoon, I was making my way back to camp, walking along a ridgeline, when I stopped to take a break. I pulled out my water bottle, admiring the view across the valley. And that's when I saw him. Just a speck, really, on the opposite ridgeline. A splash of bright orange against the muted browns and greens of the trees. A man. He was standing perfectly still, facing me. Even from that distance, I could tell he wasn't moving. Just standing there, a lone orange figure. My first thought was, hunter. It was hunting season, after all. But he was just standing there, not moving, not doing anything. And he was facing directly towards me. It felt weird, a bit too still. I watched him for a few minutes. He didn't raise a rifle, didn't walk, didn't even shift his weight. Just stood, staring. Or at least, it felt like he was staring at me. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was scoping out the land, or waiting for something. It was a big woods, plenty of room for everyone. I took another drink of water and continued on my way, keeping an eye on the orange dot until the trees blocked my view. I got back to camp as the sun was setting. I gathered more firewood, got the fire roaring, and cooked some dinner. The incident with the man in the orange hat was already fading into the back of my mind. Just a hunter, nothing to worry about. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling refreshed. I decided to head to the stream to fill my water bottles. As I walked towards the water, I noticed something near my tent. Boot prints. Clear, distinct boot prints in the damp earth near my tent zipper. They weren't mine. My boots had a different tread pattern. These were bigger. And they were just there, a few steps. Then they stopped. Like someone had walked right up to my tent, stood there for a moment, and then turned around. My blood went a little cold. I looked around the clearing. Nothing else was out of place. My fire pit was just as I'd left it. My backpack was inside the tent, but someone had been here while I was sleeping, and they had been right outside my tent. I thought about the man in the orange hat. Could it have been him? but he was on the opposite ridge. No way he could have crossed all that ground in the middle of the night without me hearing anything. Still, the image of him, standing perfectly still, watching, came back to me. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. Maybe it was another camper, just wandering, but it was strange. I packed up my day pack, deciding to go for another hike, this time paying closer attention to my surroundings. I felt a bit exposed now, like I was being watched. I spent the day hiking, consciously looking for signs of other people. Nothing. No fresh tracks. No discarded wrappers. No faint sounds of human presence. The woods were quiet, as they should be. But I kept feeling this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was looking at me. I kept turning around suddenly, but there was never anyone there. Just trees. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself back on that same ridgeline where I'd seen the man yesterday. I scanned the opposite side of the valley, my eyes searching for that splash of orange, and there he was. Same spot, same pose, standing perfectly still, facing me. The orange hat was unmistakable. He was just a small figure, but the stillness of him, the way he just stood there, watching, made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't normal. Hunters move. They stalk. They don't just stand for hours on end, facing another person miles away. I stared back, trying to figure it out. Was he waiting for me to leave? Was he just strange? I stayed there for a good 10 minutes watching him. He never moved. He never turned away. It felt like a staring contest across a huge, empty valley. I decided to head back to camp. The feeling of being watched was getting stronger, a cold knot in my stomach. This wasn't peaceful anymore. This was something else. That night, I built a bigger fire. I didn't want to be in the dark. I pulled out my old radio, trying to find a station, just for some noise, some human voice, nothing but static. The woods were settling into their deep, silent night. The sound of the stream was the only constant. I was sitting by the fire, poking at the embers, trying to read a book, but my mind kept drifting to the man in the orange hat, and the boot prints, and the feeling of being watched. Then I heard it. A cough. Clear as day. Not a natural cough. It was deliberate. Loud enough to be heard over the crackle of the fire, but not so loud that it sounded like an accidental clearing of a throat. It was just a single, sharp cough, and it came from right outside my camp, just beyond the circle of firelight. My whole body went rigid. My heart hammered. I grabbed my hunting knife, the one I always carried, pulling it from its sheath. I slowly turned my head, trying to pierce the darkness. I saw nothing. Just the blackness of the trees, pressed in close. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the stream, and the faint sounds of the night. My mind raced. Someone was out there. They were close, and they wanted me to know it. They were trying to get my attention. I stayed up all night, knife in hand, staring into the darkness, listening to every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. My eyes burned, my muscles ached with tension. I didn't dare close them. The cough echoed in my mind. It was a message. I finally drifted off into a light, uneasy sleep just as the sky was starting to lighten, curled up by the dying fire. I was exhausted, mentally and physically. I woke up with a jolt. The sun was just a sliver of orange above the trees. I sat up, blinking, my body stiff and sore. I stretched, trying to get the blood flowing. And then I saw it. Leading from the cold ashes of my fire pit, in a perfect, straight line, all the way to the zipper of my tent, was a trail of feathers. Not just a few scattered here and there. A deliberate, unbroken line of small gray-brown bird feathers, laid out one after another, like a path. From my fire, right to where my head had been sleeping. My breath hitched. My eyes widened. This wasn't random. Someone had done this, slowly, carefully, in the pitch black of the very early morning, while I was sleeping. They had been right here, inches from me. The man in the orange hat, the boot prints, the deliberate cough, the trail of feathers. It was all connected. Someone was messing with me, and it was escalating. They had been in my camp. They had been at my tent. They had been practically breathing down my neck. A cold, primal fear seized me. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a threat. This person wanted me to know they were here. They wanted to terrorize me, maybe worse. I didn't even think. I just started tearing down my camp. My hands shook as I shoved my sleeping bag into its stuff sack. I crammed my tent into its bag, not bothering to fold it neatly. I threw everything into my backpack, not caring about organization. I just needed to get out. Now, I left the cold fire pit, the perfect line of feathers, everything behind. I didn't even check for the man on the ridge. I just started hiking out, as fast as I could. I moved with a frantic, desperate energy, my heart hammering in my chest. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I would see the orange hat bobbing through the trees behind me. I hiked for hours, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. I didn't stop for water, didn't stop for a break. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't care. I just kept going, propelled by the raw fear that someone was following me, that someone was watching me leave. Finally, I burst out onto the main park road, miles from where I started. I felt a rush of relief so intense it almost brought me to my knees. I quickly made my way to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. I started the engine and drove away, not looking back at the trailhead, not looking back at the vast, silent woods. Days later, I was back home, trying to get back to normal life. But I couldn't shake the memory of that orange hat, the boot prints, the cough, the feathers. It was all so strange, so unsettling. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What did that person want? Why me? I was scrolling through the local news online, just looking for anything to distract myself, when a headline caught my eye. A small, local paper. Hunter vanishes from State Park Ridge. My blood ran cold. I clicked on it. The article was short. A hunter, described as a man in his late 50s, wearing an orange hunting cap, had gone missing from the state park just a few days ago. The same days I was there. He had been reported missing by his family after he didn't return home. Search and rescue had been out, but they hadn't found anything. No trace. He had just vanished. From that same ridge, the one where I had seen him, standing perfectly still, facing me, my hand started to shake. It couldn't be. But it was. It had to be. The man in the orange hat. The one who had been watching me. The one who had been in my camp. He was gone. Vanished. Just like that. I closed the laptop, my mind reeling. Was he gone because of me? Was he a warning? Or was I just the next target for whatever took him? I didn't know. And I never wanted to find out. I never went camping alone in that park again. Or anywhere, really. The idea of being watched, of being hunted, by someone who wasn't a monster, but just a deeply unsettling human being, was far more terrifying than any ghost story. And the thought that he vanished right after I left, it still makes me shiver. Story number 3. Me and my girlfriend, Sarah, decided to go camping for a few days. We'd picked out this spot deep in the Daniel Boone National Forest, a place neither of us had ever been. We were excited, looking forward to getting away from work, just some peace and quiet. The drive out there was pretty long, and by the time we hit the really small towns, we were starving. So, we pulled over at the first place that looked like a diner. It was one of those old rundown places, just a few beat-up cars in the parking lot. We walked in, and the bell above the door jingled. The place was almost empty. Just a couple of old guys at the counter sipping coffee, and a waitress with tired eyes who gave us menus. We sat down in a booth by the window. The air smelled like stale coffee and fried food. As we were looking at the menu, one of the guys at the counter turned on his stool. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with a thin face and kind of watery eyes. He had on a baseball cap, pulled low. He just stared at us for a second, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Passing through?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like he didn't talk much. "Yeah," I said, trying to be friendly. "Just heading out to do some camping." "Oh yeah?" he drawled. "Whereabouts you aiming to set up?" I hesitated for a second. Usually, I don't tell strangers our exact plans, but he seemed harmless enough. Just curious. "We're headed for the Clear Creek area," I told him. "Got a spot picked out near a little stream." He listened, slowly nodding. When I finished, he just looked at us for another long second. Then he said, "Shouldn't." Sarah and I exchanged a glance. "Shouldn't what?" she asked, a polite smile on her face. He just shook his head slightly. "Shouldn't camp there." And then he gave us a slow, wide smile. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold, knowing kind of smile, like he knew something we didn't, something bad. A shiver went down my spine, despite the warm air in the diner. Sarah looked a little uncomfortable too. The waitress came over then, and we ordered our food, trying to act normal. The man turned back to his coffee, but I could feel his eyes on us the whole time we ate. It was an unsettling feeling. When we left, the bell jingled again, and I glanced back. He was still sitting there, watching us. That same weird, unblinking stare. We got in the car and drove off, feeling a bit relieved to be out of there. "Well, that was creepy," Sarah said as we drove. "Yeah, I guess some locals just don't like outsiders," I replied, trying to sound casual, but the man's smile kept replaying in my head. Maybe he was just trying to mess with us. We pushed it out of our minds as we got closer to the forest, excited about the camping. The drive into the forest was rough. The paved road turned to gravel, then just to two muddy ruts. My truck rattled and bounced. We finally found the turnoff for our spot. It was a small, secluded clearing, just like we'd seen on the map, with a gentle stream running through it. Perfect. We started setting up camp, getting our tent out, laying out our gear. The sun was still pretty high. Sarah was kicking aside some leaves to clear a spot for the firewood, and then she stopped. "Hey," she said, her voice a little quiet. "Look at this." I walked over. Tucked into a thick patch of brush, almost hidden, was an old faded blanket, and next to it, a single, dirty, men's sock. They looked like they'd been there for a while, but not so long that they were falling apart, like someone had been sleeping there. Recently. My stomach clenched a little. "Someone was here," I muttered. Sarah picked up the sock with a stick. "Looks like it. Maybe another camper?" But it wasn't a usual camping setup. No fire ring, no other signs of a proper camp. Just a blanket and a sock, shoved into the bushes like someone was hiding them. Or like someone had woken up and left in a hurry, not bothering to pack everything. It felt off. "Well, they're gone now," I said, trying to sound confident. "Let's just set up." We tossed the blanket and sock deeper into the woods, not wanting to touch them, and went back to getting our camp ready. But the feeling of being watched was back. The man from the diner, the weird smile, the blanket in the brush, it all started to connect in a way that made me uneasy. We got the tent up, made a small fire, cooked some hot dogs. The sun went down, and the stars came out, bright as diamonds. The air got cold. We sat by the fire, listening to the crackle of the wood and the gentle gurgle of the stream. We talked about our day, trying to ignore the lingering feeling of unease. As the night got deeper, really dark, the fire had burned down to embers. We were just sitting there in the quiet, wrapped in blankets. Then we heard it. Whispers. Not words, exactly. Not anything we could understand. It was more like tones. Low, soft, almost like air moving, but with a definite human quality to it. And there was a quiet, mocking laughter mixed in. It sounded like it was coming from deeper in the woods, just beyond the edge of our firelight. Sarah gripped my arm. Her eyes were wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah." We both held our breath, listening. The whispers continued. They weren't loud, but they were clear. Like 2 or 3 people, talking in hushed, conspiring tones, punctuated by that low, chilling laughter. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laughter that made your skin crawl, that suggested something cruel. "Who's out there?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I slowly reached for the small axe I kept by the fire pit, just in case we needed to chop more wood. It wasn't much, but it was something. I held it in my lap. We sat absolutely still, listening, straining our ears. The sounds seemed to move, too. First from the left, then a little behind us, then back to the front. Always just out of sight. Always just beyond the reach of our weak flashlight beam. It felt like they were circling us. "They're playing with us," Sarah mumbled, her voice barely audible. The whispers continued for what felt like forever. Sometimes they'd fade, and we'd think they were gone. And then they'd start up again, closer this time, the mocking laughter clearer. It was pure psychological torture. We couldn't sleep. We just sat there, huddled together by the dying fire, staring into the dark, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. They just whispered and laughed. Finally, the first hint of dawn started to creep through the trees, a faint gray light. The whispers stopped. Instantly, the woods fell silent, except for the stream. We were exhausted, our eyes burning, our bodies stiff with tension. "We're leaving," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "Right now." I didn't argue. I didn't want to be here another second. We started packing up, moving quickly, almost frantically. We didn't say much, just stuffed things into our bags. The fear was a cold, hard knot in my gut. As I was zipping up Sarah's duffel bag, she let out a small gasp. "My car," she pointed. I looked over. Her car was parked a little way off, under some trees. The hood was slightly ajar. I walked over, my heart sinking. I lifted the hood. The oil cap. It was unscrewed and sitting on the engine block, not on the spout. Someone had opened it. They hadn't taken anything, hadn't poured anything in, but they had messed with it. A clear sign they had been there, right next to our only way out. "They're really trying to make us nervous," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice shook. I screwed the cap back on, my hands trembling. Then, as we started making our way to the truck, gathering the last few things, I almost tripped. I caught myself, looking down. There it was, twine. Thin, dark green twine, strung between two trees at shin height, like a tripwire, just a few feet from our tent, and another one, further back, near where our truck was parked. And another one, almost invisible against the fallen leaves. They were everywhere, all around our camp, like traps. Not designed to hurt necessarily, but to trip us, to make noise, to let whoever was watching know exactly where we were. Or maybe to make us fall and hurt ourselves. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her face pale. She saw them too. They were waiting for us to leave in the dark. The full horror of it hit me. These people, whoever they were, had been in our camp while we slept. They had set up traps. They had been whispering, laughing at us. They had messed with our car. And they had been waiting for us to make a mistake. We scrambled into the truck, heart pounding. I started the engine, threw it into reverse, and got out of that clearing as fast as the truck would go. We didn't look back. We just drove, fast, bumping along the muddy ruts, through the dark, silent forest. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of eyes. Every rustle of leaves sounded like someone following us. Finally, we reached the paved road. The relief was immense, like a giant weight had been lifted from my chest. We still had a long drive ahead of us to get completely out of the area, but at least we were out of the woods. As we drove past the turnoff for the forest road, I glanced over, and there he was. The man from the diner, the one with the thin face and the weird smile. His old, beat-up pickup truck was parked on the shoulder, facing our direction. He was sitting in the driver's seat, his arm resting on the open window, and he was just watching us. He didn't wave, he didn't honk, he didn't move. He just stared as my truck went by, that same unblinking, cold, knowing stare, like he had been waiting for us. Like he knew exactly what had happened. He didn't follow us. He didn't even acknowledge us, really. Just watched. I pressed the gas pedal harder, speeding up, trying to get away from his gaze. We didn't stop until we were miles and miles down the highway, in a town we didn't know, surrounded by people who didn't know us. We never went camping in that area again. We never talked to locals about our plans after that. The memory of those whispers, the blanket and sock, the oil cap, the twine traps, and especially that man's cold smile, it's all burned into my mind. It was a clear message. Some places, some people, they just don't want you there, and they'll go to terrifying lengths to make sure you know it. It taught us a lesson we'll never forget. Sometimes, silence is better. And sometimes, you really shouldn't camp there. Story number 4. My friend Dave and I, we've been camping buddies since we were kids. Every fall, we'd pack up our gear and head into the woods, usually somewhere quiet, off the beaten path. This time, we picked a spot in a less traveled section of the Monongahela National Forest. We wanted to find a place where we wouldn't see another soul for days. We hiked in a good 4 miles, found a clearing near a small, clear stream that was perfect. We dropped our packs, stretched our legs, and started setting up camp. The air was cool and crisp, smelled like damp leaves and pine. It was exactly what we needed. Dave, he's always good about gathering firewood. He likes to wander off a bit, find the really good stuff. So, while I was messing with the tent, he grabbed his small hatchet and walked off into the trees, saying he'd be back in a bit with enough wood to last us through the night. I was just finishing staking down the tent when I heard him yell, not a panicked yell, but surprised. "Hey man, you gotta see this." I walked over, pushing through some thick brush towards his voice. He was standing next to a big, old oak tree, looking down at the ground. He had tripped, apparently. And what he tripped over, it wasn't a root or a rock. "Look," he said, pointing with his foot. Poking out of the damp earth, barely visible under a layer of wet leaves and dirt, was a dark, rectangular shape. And right in the middle of it, a metal handle. It was dark, probably painted green or black, and looked really heavy-duty. It was attached to something that was mostly buried. We knelt down, pushing away the leaves and loose dirt. It was a box. A really big box. Heavy-duty, military style, like an old ammunition crate, but bigger. It was made of thick steel, and it was half buried in the ground. And it was covered, completely wrapped, in layers and layers of old, brittle duct tape. Like someone had gone to a lot of trouble to seal it up. And on the side, near the handle, we could see a padlock. A thick, rusty padlock, clamped shut. "What in the world is this?" Dave whispered, running his hand over the rough metal. It looked ancient, but also like it had been put there with purpose. No trees had grown through it. No roots had wrapped around it. It was like it had been buried there relatively recently, or at least in a cleared space. We tried to pull at the handle, just to see if it would budge, but it was stuck fast. Whatever was holding it in the ground, it was solid. We even tried digging around it a bit with our hands, but the earth was packed tight. This wasn't just a buried box. This was a hidden box. "Think there's treasure in it?" Dave grinned, but his eyes were wide. "Or something else," I said, a shiver running down my spine. The way it was taped up, the heavy lock. It felt less like treasure and more like something someone wanted to keep very, very hidden. And for a reason. We looked at each other. The sun was starting to get lower in the sky. It would be dark soon, and we were pretty far from anywhere. "Maybe we should just leave it," I suggested. "It's not ours, and who knows what's in it." Dave nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably a good idea. Doesn't feel right messing with it." So, we covered it back up with leaves, trying to make it look just like it was before we found it. We marked the spot in our minds, just in case, but we told ourselves we'd leave it alone. We gathered our firewood and headed back to camp, but the image of that buried locker stayed with us. It had changed the feeling of the woods somehow, made it feel less wild and more like someone's secret. That night, we built a good fire. The conversation kept going back to the box. What could be in it? Why was it there? Who buried it? We kept imagining all kinds of things. Money, old war relics, maybe something dangerous. We tried to laugh it off, tell ghost stories, but the thought of that heavy, taped-up box, just 100 yards from our tent, was unsettling. We listened to the usual night sounds. Crickets, owls, the wind in the trees. Nothing out of the ordinary. We finally zipped up the tent and tried to sleep, but it was a restless night for both of us. The next morning, we woke up to sunlight filtering through the trees. We made some coffee, cooked some oatmeal. The curiosity about the box was still strong. "Let's go check on it," Dave said, "just to see if it's still there." I agreed. We walked back to the spot, pushing through the brush, looking for the oak tree. We found it, and then we looked down at the spot where the handle had been poking out. It was gone. Completely gone. My jaw dropped. The ground was disturbed, a little bit of fresh dirt mixed with the leaves, but there was no hole. No sign it had been dug up. Just gone, like it had never been there. No tracks around it, no drag marks. Nothing. It was like the earth had just swallowed it whole. We knelt down, feeling the dirt. It was still damp from the morning dew. There were no boot prints, no shovel marks, nothing. It was just a flat, disturbed patch of earth where a heavy steel box had been less than 12 hours ago. How is that even possible? Dave whispered, his voice hushed. We didn't hear anything last night, not a sound. We had been listening. We were both light sleepers, and we had been keyed up because of the box. There was no way someone could have come in, dug up a heavy steel locker, and carried it away without making a sound, not in the middle of the night, not without leaving any kind of trace. A cold dread started to settle in. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some local taking back his property. This was something else. Someone had taken it. But how and why? And how did they know we found it? We went back to camp, a sense of unease following us like a shadow. The beautiful, peaceful woods suddenly felt menacing. We kept looking over our shoulders, jumping at every squirrel. We tried to figure out what could have happened. Maybe someone saw us yesterday, but we hadn't seen anyone. It just didn't make sense. We spent the day trying to hike, trying to fish, trying to do anything to get our minds off it, but it was no use. The woods felt different. We felt watched, exposed. That night, we built an even bigger fire, piling on all the wood we had. We kept our knives out, close at hand. We didn't talk much, just listened. The night sound seemed louder, closer. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl made us flinch. We kept telling ourselves it was just our imaginations, but we both knew it wasn't. Something was out there, someone. I drifted off into a light sleep, exhausted from the tension. The fire was burning low, casting long, dancing shadows. Suddenly, I was wide awake. My eyes snapped open. I didn't know why. I hadn't heard anything specific, but I felt it, a presence. And then I heard it, a soft, deliberate sound. The zipper of our tent. Someone was unzipping it. Slowly, carefully. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath, frozen in my sleeping bag. I could hear Dave's breathing, deep and even, next to me. He was still asleep. I couldn't move. I couldn't even call his name. The zipper continued, a slow, rasping sound in the absolute silence of the tent. It was almost fully unzipped. Any second, it would open, and whatever was out there would be looking in. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body rigid with terror. This wasn't a dream. This was real. Then, just as the zipper reached the end, the sound stopped. Abruptly, complete silence. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my eyes still squeezed shut, my muscles screaming from the tension. I could feel the cold night air seeping into the tent through the open zipper. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. I was terrified of what I would see. But there was nothing. The tent flap was open. It was black outside, too dark to see anything. But no one was standing there. No one was peering in. There was just the open zipper. I lay there, breathing shallow, listening. Still nothing. No sounds from outside. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. I slowly reached out, my hand trembling, and fumbled for the zipper. I pulled it shut, slowly, carefully, every nerve ending screaming. The sound of the zipper felt deafening in the silence. When it was finally closed, I pressed my back against the tent wall, staring into the darkness, not daring to move. I didn't sleep another wink that night. I just lay there, listening, waiting. Dave woke up a few times, rolled over, mumbled something, but he never seemed to realize what had happened. I didn't tell him. I couldn't. The terror of it was too raw. When dawn finally broke, painting the tent walls a pale gray, I sat up. My body was stiff, my eyes gritty. Dave finally stirred, stretching. "Rough night?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound normal. "Just kept waking up. I didn't mention the zipper. I just wanted to get out of there, The buried locker, the fact that it was gone, the silent unzipping of the tent, it was all too much. "Let's just pack it up," I said. "I think I've had enough camping for a while." Dave looked at me, surprised, but then he nodded. He could probably tell by my face that something was seriously wrong. He didn't argue. We packed up our gear even faster than the last time, stuffing everything haphazardly into our bags. We didn't make coffee, didn't eat breakfast. We just wanted to be gone. As we were walking out of the clearing, heading back to the truck, I happened to glance down at the ground where our fire pit had been. We'd kicked dirt over the ashes, trying to put it out completely. And there, right in the center of the disturbed earth where our fire had been, was another box. Not the same one. This one was smaller, maybe a foot long, half a foot wide. It was black, also steel, but newer looking. And it was open. The lid was lifted slightly, showing a dark, empty interior. It was unlocked. And it was empty. My breath caught in my throat. Dave saw it too. He stopped dead. This was a new box. It wasn't the one we found, but it was just as deliberately placed. And it was where our fire had been, where we had been sitting, just hours before. The message was clear. They had been watching us. They had known exactly where we were. They had taken the first box, and they had left this one, empty, like a warning. It was like they were saying, "We were here. We replaced what you found, and we know everything." We didn't say a word. We just turned and walked away from it, not touching it, not looking back. We kept walking, fast, through the quiet woods, not stopping until we reached the main road. We jumped into the truck and drove, didn't stop until we were out of the forest, out of the small towns, and back on a major highway. We never talked about that second box, or what happened in the tent. We didn't need to. We both knew. Something incredibly disturbing had happened out there. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was just people. People who knew the woods, people who watched, people who wanted to send a message. And that made it infinitely more terrifying. I still don't know what was in that first box, or why it was buried, or who those people were. But I know one thing for sure. Some secrets are best left buried, and some woods are just not safe. Story number 5. We were camping on my family friend's land in West Virginia. This wasn't some deep, remote wilderness spot. It was more like a large, private forest with some cleared areas. My buddy, Mark, and his girlfriend, Jessica, and I were just looking for a quiet weekend away from the city. The land was huge, mostly undeveloped, and bordered by other private properties, so we figured we wouldn't run into anyone. We pitched our tents in a nice little clearing, cooked some burgers, and just enjoyed the peace. Nothing felt off that first day. The sun was warm, the birds were singing, and it was just us out there. We had a clear view from our camp up to a ridge about a half-mile away. It wasn't a super high ridge, but it was enough to see over the tops of most of the trees. As the sun started to set on that first night, we were sitting around the campfire, watching the sky turn orange and purple. Then Mark pointed. "Hey, what's that?" Way up on the ridge, barely visible through the darkening trees, a set of headlights flickered on. It was a truck. We could just make out the shape, a pretty beat-up old green pickup. It pulled up to the edge of the tree line, turned off its lights, but we could hear the low rumble of its engine idling. It just sat there. For a long time. "Probably just some hunter checking his traps," I said, trying to sound casual. "It was hunting season, after all." "Or someone checking on the land," Jessica added. "It's private property. Maybe they're making sure no one's trespassing." We watched it for a bit longer. The truck didn't move. The engine just idled. It was a strange place to park, not on any road we knew. After about 20 minutes, the engine cut off, and then a few minutes later, the headlights flashed on quickly, and the truck slowly backed up and turned around, disappearing back over the ridge. "Weird," Mark mumbled. "Thought it might be a game warden or something." We shrugged it off. It was private land. Things happen. We finished our beers, listened to the crackle of the fire, and eventually turned in for the night. The thought of the truck faded. The next day was good. We hiked around, found a small creek, and enjoyed being away from everything. The sun was shining, and the air was still. We got back to camp in the late afternoon, tired and happy. We started getting dinner ready, the smell of cooking meat filling the air. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with the same fiery colors as the night before, Jessica nudged me. "Look." I followed her gaze up to the ridge, and there it was, the same green pickup, parked in the exact same spot, engine idling, lights off, just sitting there, again. My stomach twisted a little. This wasn't just a random hunter or someone checking the land. This was too specific. Same time, same place. "That's the same truck, right?" Mark asked, his voice low. "Looks like it," I replied. "What are they doing?" We watched it again. It sat there for about 15 minutes this time. We couldn't see anyone in it. Couldn't see anything moving. Just the truck, a silent, idling presence on the ridge, watching our camp. Then, just like the night before, the engine cut, the lights flashed on, and it turned around and disappeared. We didn't talk much about it after that. It had put a damper on the evening. We kept glancing up at the ridge, even after the truck was gone. The feeling of being watched was strong, like we were on display. The next morning, the uneasiness lingered. We were drinking coffee, trying to shake it off. I went to grab something from behind my tent, and as I walked around it, I stopped. In the damp earth behind my tent, clear as day, were boot prints. Not mine, not Mark's or Jessica's. These were bigger, deeper. They weren't walking away. They were just standing there, right behind my tent, like someone had stood there, watching us sleep. And then I saw something else. Just a few feet from the boot prints, almost buried in the leaves, was a melted plastic lighter, one of those cheap, disposable ones, like someone had dropped it, or left it, deliberately. My heart started to pound. This wasn't just a weird truck. Someone had been in our camp while we were sleeping, standing right behind my tent. I showed it to Mark and Jessica. Their faces went pale. "They were here," Jessica whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Who?" Mark asked, looking around wildly, as if expecting to see someone emerge from the trees. We didn't know, but the implications were terrifying. Someone was watching us. Someone was getting closer. Someone was trying to scare us. Or worse. The melted lighter, the boot prints. It felt like a deliberate message. We were here. We know where you sleep. We tried to go about our day, but the relaxed atmosphere was completely gone. We stayed close to camp, keeping our eyes on the tree line, always looking towards the ridge. Every distant sound made us jump. We didn't feel safe anymore, not really. The vastness of the woods, which had felt peaceful before, now felt like a huge, empty space where someone could hide and watch us without us ever knowing. As evening approached, we were all on edge. The sun started to set. We didn't even bother building a fire. We just sat there, tense, staring up at the ridge. We knew it was coming. And sure enough, as the light faded, the green pickup appeared. But this time it was different. It didn't park in the exact same spot. It parked closer, noticeably closer. Not by much, maybe 50 yards closer than before, but enough that it was obvious. And this time, when it stopped, the engine cut off immediately. No idling, just silence. Complete, unsettling silence. We stared at it, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. The truck was just a dark silhouette against the last sliver of light in the sky. It sat there, still, not a sound. "They're trying to scare us," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. She was shaking. "They're succeeding," Mark replied, his voice equally quiet. We waited, 10 minutes, 20, half an hour. The truck didn't move. No lights, no engine, just a silent, dark shape on the ridge, watching. The darkness deepened until the truck was almost impossible to see, just a darker shadow against the night sky. We couldn't see anyone inside, but we knew someone was there, sitting in the dark, staring down at our camp. The silence was heavy, oppressive. It felt like hours. We didn't move. We didn't speak. The fear was a living thing in the air between us. It wasn't the kind of fear that made you scream or run. It was a cold, creeping dread that paralyzed you, that made you want to disappear into the ground. Finally, I spoke, my voice raspy. "We're leaving." Mark and Jessica looked at me, their eyes wide in the gloom. They didn't argue. There was no argument to be had. "Now," I added, quietly. We began to pack. Not a word was spoken. We moved like ghosts, our every movement precise and hushed. We didn't bother with the tent poles. We just collapsed the tents and shoved them into their bags. Sleeping bags, cooking gear, everything was crammed in without a thought for organization. The only sound was the soft rustle of fabric, the muted clink of metal against metal. Every second felt like an eternity. We kept glancing up at the ridge, terrified that the truck would start, that someone would get out, that they would know we were leaving. It took us maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Our hands were shaking, our hearts thumping. We slipped our backpacks on, the weight heavy on our shoulders. We took one last look at the dark shape of the truck on the ridge. Still silent. Still there. "Let's go," I whispered. We walked out of the clearing, not on the main path, but through the thicker brush, hoping to be quieter, less visible. We moved through the woods like shadows, our flashlights off, relying on the faint starlight and our night vision. We made our way towards the old access road where my truck was parked, probably a mile away. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made us freeze, our breath held tight in our chests. We finally reached my truck. It felt like a fortress. I fumbled with the keys, my hands so cold they almost wouldn't work. I unlocked the doors, and we piled in, throwing our gear into the back seat. Mark got in the passenger seat. Jessica squeezed into the back. "Lights off," Mark whispered, even though it was already dark. I nodded, starting the engine. It rumbled to life, a loud, terrifying sound in the silent night. I put it in reverse, backed out of the small parking spot, and turned onto the dirt road. No headlights, just the faint glow of the dashboard. We drove slowly, carefully, trying not to make too much noise, trying not to bounce too much over the ruts. The road was long, winding through the trees. It felt like an escape. After about 5 minutes of driving in the dark, my eyes straining to see the road ahead, I glanced in my rearview mirror. And there it was. Behind us, a dark shape, no lights, just a black mass moving through the trees, the green pickup. My blood ran cold. "They're following us," I breathed, the words barely audible. Mark looked back. No way. But he saw it too. The truck was maybe 100 yards behind us, keeping pace. It had no lights on. None. It was just a silent, dark shadow, moving through the absolute blackness of the trees, following us. "Turn on the lights," Jessica yelled from the back, her voice a terrified squeak. "No," I snapped. "If they don't have theirs on, we don't want to give away our position." It was a terrifying game of cat and mouse in the dark. We were on a dirt road, maybe 3 miles to the main highway. 3 long, winding miles. I pushed the gas, speeding up, the truck bouncing and rattling. The truck behind us sped up too, staying exactly the same distance. I slammed on the brakes for a second, then accelerated again, trying to shake them, but they matched me perfectly. They knew this land. They knew these roads. The silence in my truck was deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine and our ragged breathing. We kept glancing back, terrified. The dark shape of the truck was relentless, a silent predator. Every curve in the road, every rise and dip, made my heart pound harder. I imagined them pulling up next to us, forcing us off the road, or blocking our way. But they just kept following, silently, relentlessly. We finally saw it, the faint glow of streetlights up ahead, the highway, freedom. I slammed the gas pedal down, pushing my truck as fast as it would go. We burst out onto the main road, tires squealing as I made the turn. I didn't even look back this time. I just focused on getting away. I drove until the sun started to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. We were miles and miles from that forest, in a busy highway rest stop. We were exhausted, shaken, but safe. We never went back to that land. We never talked about it much after that, not in detail. But the memory of that green pickup silently following us through the dark, with no lights on, for over 3 miles, it's a memory that still makes my skin crawl. And it taught me that some of the scariest things in the woods aren't monsters, but the people who live in them, and the lengths they'll go to make you feel like you're being hunted. Story number 7. My best friend, Dave, and we used to go camping all the time. Not the fancy kind, just pulling off some dirt road, finding a spot, and roughing it. This time, we were out in a pretty remote part of West Virginia, looking for an old abandoned scout cabin we'd heard about. It was supposed to be deep in the woods, a real ghost of a building. We found it just as dusk was settling in, a sad, rotting little shack, half covered in vines. It was creepy, but perfect for what we wanted. We decided to set up our tents a bit away from the cabin, in a small clearing nearby. We built a decent fire, cooked some hot dogs, and just hung out, talking and listening to the night sounds. The first couple of hours were normal. Crickets, distant owl hoots, the crackle of our fire. We were tired from the hike in, so we were pretty quiet ourselves. We were just about to call it a night, maybe around 10 or 11, when we heard it. Soft sounds at first, just a murmur, like a distant radio maybe. Then it got clearer. It was laughing. Children laughing. My head snapped up. Dave looked at me, his eyebrows raised. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Kids?" It was unmistakably the sound of young kids. Giggles, excited little shouts, the sound of running feet, light and quick through the leaves, like they were playing tag. Deep in the woods. "That's weird," Dave said, his voice lower than usual. "There's no houses out here, no roads." We listened harder. The sounds were definitely coming from deeper in the woods, maybe a quarter mile away, in the direction of the old cabin. But they weren't coming from the cabin itself. They were just in the trees. "Maybe it's a family, camping really far out?" I offered, trying to come up with a logical explanation. But it felt wrong. It was late. There were no campfires to be seen. No adults yelling. Just kids. Playing. In the dark. The sounds continued. We heard what sounded like a little girl's squeal, then a boy's rough shout, then more laughter. It was like they were just having the time of their lives, completely oblivious to the fact that it was pitch black and they were in the middle of nowhere. "They don't have flashlights," Dave noted. We strained our eyes, but there were no beams of light cutting through the trees, no headlamps, just the sounds. We sat there, frozen, listening. The sounds would fade for a bit, like the kids had run further away. Then they'd start up again, sometimes seeming to come from a different direction than before. It was disorienting. One minute they sounded like they were over to our left, the next they seemed to be behind the cabin. "Okay, this is getting creepy," Dave said, pulling his knees up to his chest. I nodded. It wasn't just late. It was the total lack of adult voices, the way they moved around, the fact that there were no lights. It felt off. Very off. Then it happened. Through the soft rustling of the leaves and the distant giggling, I heard it. My name. My actual name, said in a child's voice, softly, like a whisper on the wind. "Michael." My blood ran cold. My head snapped up again, eyes wide. I looked at Dave. He was staring at me, his face pale in the firelight. "Did you hear that?" I breathed. He nodded, his eyes fixed on mine. "They said your name." We sat in absolute silence for a moment, listening. The giggling, the footsteps, the shouts, they were still there, but they seemed to have paused for a second right after my name, like they were waiting for a response. A wave of pure dread washed over me. This wasn't just random kids anymore. This was something targeted, something that knew my name. But how? We were miles from the nearest town. No one knew we were here. "Call out," Dave whispered. "Say something." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me not to engage. But the idea of just sitting there, listening to them say my name, felt worse. So, I took a deep breath, trying to make my voice steady. "Hello?" I yelled into the darkness. "Is anyone out there?" The response was immediate. The laughing stopped. The footsteps stopped. The soft yelling stopped. Everything stopped. The woods went completely, utterly silent. Not a cricket. Not an owl. Not even the rustle of leaves. It was like the entire forest had just held its breath. Dave and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with fear. The silence was heavier, more terrifying than any sound. It felt watchful, expectant, like we had just stepped into a trap. We sat there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just listening to the absence of sound. We kept our eyes glued to the dark tree line, expecting to see something, anything, but nothing moved. Nothing appeared. The silence was absolute. Eventually, Dave quietly poked the fire, trying to make it bigger, throw more light into the darkness around us. But it didn't help. The darkness felt like it was pressing in on us. We stayed up almost the entire rest of the night. We talked in hushed whispers, trying to rationalize it. It had to be echoes, Dave suggested. Or maybe some teenagers messing with us. But the thought of teenagers hiking out here, in the dark, without lights, just to prank some random campers, it didn't quite fit. And my name? How could they have known my name? Every time we started to relax, the silence would feel even more menacing. We kept imagining little figures, just beyond the firelight, watching us. Finally, the first hint of dawn, a faint gray light, started to appear through the trees. The oppressive feeling of the night slowly began to lift. The silence eased, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest waking up. Birds started to chirp. The air felt a little less heavy. We slowly, cautiously, unzipped our tents. We had slept with our knives by our sides, ready for anything. We crawled out, stiff and exhausted, our eyes scanning the clearing. Everything looked normal. The trees, the fire pit, the ground. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. It was like the night had been a terrifying dream. But then, as I walked over to the picnic table we'd set up our cooking gear on, I stopped dead. On the outside of my tent, clearly visible on the dark green fabric, were handprints. Tiny handprints. Not mud, not dirt. They were dark, like charcoal or ash, and they were tiny, unmistakable children's handprints, pressed against the tent fabric. On the outside, my breath hitched. I called Dave over. He saw them too. His face went pale. There were 5 of them, spread out, almost like someone had walked around the tent, pressing their hand against it as they went. One was right next to the zipper, another near the head of my sleeping bag. They were small, no bigger than a 5 or 6-year-old's hand, and they were dark, like they'd rubbed their hands in the ashes of our fire pit or something. We stared at them, a fresh wave of terror washing over us. The children's voices, the laughing, my name. It hadn't been a dream. It hadn't been teenagers. Someone had been here. Kids. Real kids. And they had been right next to our tent. While we slept. "This isn't right," Dave whispered, his voice trembling. "We need to go, now." I didn't argue. There was no argument to be had. The cheerful camp atmosphere was completely shattered. We started packing up our gear with a frantic energy, stuffing everything into our backpacks. We didn't care about folding things neatly or sorting stuff out. We just wanted to be gone. The handprints felt like they were watching us, silent accusations on the tent fabric. We kept glancing at them as we packed. They didn't rub off easily. They were stubbornly there, dark and clear. We didn't even bother to clean them. We just rolled up the tent, handprints and all, and shoved it into its bag. We didn't eat breakfast, didn't make coffee, just chugged some water and hit the trail. We hiked out fast, not talking much, just putting one foot in front of the other. We kept looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see tiny figures emerge from the trees, or to hear that unsettling laughter again. The woods felt different now, no longer peaceful, no longer quiet. They felt like they were full of unseen eyes, full of secrets we didn't want to know. We didn't stop until we got back to the main road, and even then we felt a lingering sense of unease. We got in my truck and drove away from those mountains, not looking back. We never went back to that part of West Virginia, and we never camped near an old abandoned scout cabin again. We still talk about it sometimes, in hushed tones, trying to figure it out. Who were those kids? Why were they out there in the middle of the night, in the dark, laughing and playing, knowing my name? Were they lost? Were they alone? Or were they something else entirely? We heard stories, later, from people in the nearest town, about missing kids, about strange occurrences in those woods, about families who just vanished. Nothing ever officially connected, of course. Just whispers, folk stories. But after that night, I believed every single one of them. Because I knew, with a cold certainty, that something was out there in those woods, and it wasn't ghosts. It was real, human, and utterly terrifying. The thought of those tiny handprints, just inches from my sleeping face, still makes me sick to my stomach, and the sound of children's laughter, even now, gives me chills. Story number 6. I was backpacking solo through the Blue Ridge Mountains. This was my thing, getting away from everything, just me and my pack in the trees. I liked the silence, the challenge of it. I'd done plenty of solo trips before, but this one, I don't know. This one felt different, even from the start. I'd planned a route that took me pretty deep into a less trafficked section, hoping to find some real solitude. The first day was good. Long hike, pretty steep in places, but the views were incredible. I saw a few other hikers on the main trail in the morning, but by midday, I was pretty much alone. I kept pushing, trying to get to a clearing I'd spotted on my map, a place near a small, unnamed creek. I didn't see another person all day after I branched off the main path. The woods felt quiet, almost too quiet. No birds chirping, just the rustle of leaves under my boots. I finally found the clearing as the sun was starting to get low. It was perfect, tucked away, small and flat, with the creek just a few steps away. I dropped my pack, felt the weight lift from my shoulders, and just breathed for a minute. I got to work setting up my small, lightweight tent. I made a tiny fire, just big enough to boil some water for my dehydrated meal. I ate, staring into the flames, feeling pretty good about the day. The stars came out, a million of them, glittering through the tree canopy. I zipped myself into my tent, pulled my sleeping bag tight around me, and fell asleep pretty quickly, exhausted from the hike. I woke up, not from a sound, not from a dream, just woke up, like a sudden, cold jolt. My eyes were wide open in the absolute darkness of the tent. My heart was pounding, a hard, fast thump against my ribs. And then I heard it. Breathing. Not my own. This breathing was shallow, raspy, but it was there. And it was outside my tent. Close. Like someone was kneeling right next to the fabric, breathing in and out, steadily. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. I held my own breath, straining to hear, to understand. The breathing continued. It wasn't heavy, like a large animal. It was light, almost like someone trying to be quiet, but failing. Or maybe they weren't trying that hard at all. Maybe they wanted me to hear it. My mind raced. A bear? No, too light, too steady. A deer? No. Animals don't breathe like that, just listening. This was human, or something that breathed like a human. The air in my tent felt suddenly thick and heavy. I could feel the cold seeping in from the ground. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. I just lay there, listening to that quiet, steady breathing, right outside my tent. It felt like it was inches from my face, separated only by the thin nylon. It went on for what felt like an hour. Just the breathing. No movement. No other sounds. Just that quiet, horrifying inhale and exhale. I imagined someone kneeling out there, head bowed, listening to me, waiting for me to move, to make a sound. The hair on my arms stood on end. My scalp tingled. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No rustle of leaves, no footsteps, no sound of someone getting up, just silence. Like whatever was out there had just vanished into thin air. I lay there for another long time, still not moving, listening to the deafening silence. My ears were ringing. I slowly, carefully, let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My body was shaking, trembling uncontrollably. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, staring at the dark fabric above me, every nerve ending screaming, listening to the sounds of the night, trying to hear if the breathing would start again. But it didn't. The rest of the night was quiet, deceptively so. When the first gray light of dawn finally touched the tent, I slowly, cautiously, unzipped the zipper. My hands were still trembling. I pushed aside the flap and peered out. The clearing looked normal. The trees, the creek, the fire pit, everything was just as I'd left it. I slowly crawled out of my tent, my eyes scanning the ground around me. No tracks. No signs of anything disturbed, nothing. It was like I'd imagined it. But then I saw it. Tucked neatly against the base of a small pine tree, about 10 feet from my tent, was a rolled-up sleeping bag. A dark, slightly worn sleeping bag, rolled up tight and neat. It looked like a fairly old, standard camping sleeping bag, dark green or brown. My blood ran cold. I hadn't put that there. I knew it. I hadn't seen it yesterday. I walked over to it slowly, my heart pounding again. It was just a sleeping bag, but it wasn't mine. And I hadn't seen another person all day yesterday. No one. And now, a sleeping bag. Right there. Like someone had set up camp right next to me, while I slept, and then packed up again before dawn. I looked around frantically, but there were no other signs of a camp. No discarded food wrappers, no disturbed ground for a fire, no water bottles. Just this rolled-up sleeping bag. I slowly knelt down, not touching it. It was too neatly rolled, too deliberately placed. It felt like a message. Someone had been there, they had slept there, or pretended to. Right next to my tent. The breathing. It all clicked into place. Someone had been there. Someone was watching me. And they had been there all night. I stared at the sleeping bag for a long minute, my mind reeling. What kind of person does that? Why? It was so unsettling, so invasive. It wasn't just a random stranger. It felt like a deliberate act, a violation of my solitude, a statement. I finally got up, forcing myself to move. I needed to get out of there, now. I couldn't stay another night. I started packing up my gear, moving with a frantic energy, trying to ignore the constant feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing at the sleeping bag, half expecting it to unroll itself, or for someone to emerge from the trees. I folded my tent, shoved my sleeping bag into its stuff sack. I tried to do everything quickly, quietly. I ate a power bar, choked it down without really tasting it. The sun was getting higher, but the woods still felt dark, oppressive. After I had everything packed, I walked back over to where the sleeping bag had been. It was gone. Completely gone. Just like the night before, nothing was there. No disturbed ground, no drag marks. Just the pine tree, and the quiet forest floor. It was like it had never been there. Like a cruel joke. My stomach dropped. This was beyond unsettling now. This was terrifying. Someone was definitely messing with me. They had been there. They had left the sleeping bag. And they had come back and taken it. All without a sound. I didn't even bother to try and understand it. I just wanted to get out. I threw my pack onto my back, grabbed my hiking poles, and started walking, fast. I left the clearing, didn't look back. I wasn't following my planned route anymore. I was just heading for the shortest, most direct way out I could remember from my map. As I walked, I kept scanning the ground, looking for anything, and I started seeing them. Footprints. Not just random ones, my footprints from yesterday, coming into the clearing. And then, circling my entire campsite, just at the edge of the clearing, were other footprints. Barely visible in the soft earth, but there. They were big, like a man's boots. They circled my tent, went around the fire pit, then continued around the edge of the clearing, over and over. Like someone had just walked in circles around my camp all night, watching me. The thought made my blood run cold. They weren't hiding, they were just walking, right outside my tent. For hours, I sped up, almost running now, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I knew I had miles to go, but I didn't care. I just had to get out of these woods. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I pushed through some dense undergrowth, trying to cut a straight line to the nearest trail. I was breathing hard, my legs burning. I leaned against a thick tree to catch my breath, trying to calm myself down. And then I saw it. Carved roughly into the bark of the tree, just at eye level, was a hand-drawn map. It was crude, simple lines, but unmistakable. It showed the main trails, the smaller access roads, and right in the middle, clearly marked with a big red X, was my camp location, my clearing, my spot. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a stranger messing with me. Someone knew exactly where I was. Someone had been tracking me. Someone had drawn a map showing my exact location. And they had left it for me to find. It was a warning, or a threat. The terror that washed over me was primal, overwhelming. I didn't know who was doing this, or why. But they knew me. They knew where I was. And they had made it clear that they were watching. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to rest. I just started running. Not a jog, not a fast walk. Full-on running. My backpack bounced, my poles clattered, but I didn't care. I ran through the woods, crashing through branches, stumbling over roots, not looking back, not caring about anything but putting distance between myself and that tree, that map, that invisible presence that had been stalking me. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed in protest, until my entire body felt like it was going to collapse. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line and onto a small, paved road. It was a relief so profound it brought tears to my eyes. I still had miles to walk to get back to my car, but at least I was out of the deep woods. The road felt safe. I started walking, looking over my shoulder every few minutes, but no one was there. No green pickup, no man in an orange hat, no one following me. Just the empty road. It took me a few hours, but I finally made it back to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't stop until I was hundreds of miles away, in a different state. I never went backpacking solo again, not after that. The woods, which used to be my sanctuary, now felt like a place of raw, human menace. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was watchful. The feeling of being alone wasn't liberating, it was terrifyingly vulnerable. I don't know who did it, I don't know what they wanted. I just know that someone was out there, watching me, walking around my tent, drawing maps of my camp, leaving me messages. And the thought of that still makes my skin crawl. Some people, they just want to remind you that even when you think you're completely alone, you might just be the one being hunted. Story number 8. Me and 2 friends, Liam and Chloe, we decided to go camping. This wasn't a deep woods, remote trail kind of trip. We were just looking for a clear, open spot. We found this perfect field, wide and flat, on the edge of a big piece of private land we had permission to use. It bordered a dense forest on one side, but the field itself was just grass, maybe a few scattered clumps of tall weeds. No brush, no thickets, nothing to hide in. We figured that made us safer. We could see anything coming, right? We pitched our 3 tents in a triangle, set up a fire pit in the middle, and planned for a chill weekend. The openness felt good, like a big, clear space where nothing could sneak up on us. The first evening was great. We cooked hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire, told some dumb jokes, and just watched the stars come out. The field stretched out around us, vast and dark, and the tree line was a black wall in the distance. It felt peaceful, secure, even. We turned in around midnight, tired and happy. I woke up suddenly, not from a sound, but just that jolt you get sometimes, like someone poked you. My eyes flew open. My tent was dark, but I could just make out the vague outlines of my gear. I checked my phone for the time. It was 1:17 a.m. My heart was thumping a little. Nothing seemed wrong, but I had this strange, cold feeling. I lay there for a minute, listening. The usual night sounds were there. Crickets, a faint breeze rustling the tent fabric. But then, I heard something else. A faint swish, swish sound. Like someone walking through tall grass. Slowly, steadily. My eyes snapped open wider. I held my breath. The sound was coming from the direction of the tree line, maybe 200 yards away. It wasn't a deer. It was too regular, too deliberate. I slowly, carefully, unzipped a small portion of my tent flap and peered out. The field was still dark, but there was a sliver of moon, enough to cast a faint, silvery glow. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the gloom. And then I saw him, a man, walking slowly along the very edge of the tree line, just pacing, He was a dark, hunched silhouette against the slightly lighter trees. He wasn't walking away. He wasn't walking towards us. He was just walking parallel to our camp, circling us. Slowly, methodically. My blood ran cold. He wasn't carrying a flashlight. He had no gear that I could see, no backpack, no rifle, nothing that looked like he was camping or hunting. He was just a man, walking. In the middle of the night, on the edge of a field, circling our tents. I watched him, paralyzed. He kept moving. Swish, swish, swish. The sound of his feet in the tall grass. He made no other sound. No cough, no whistle, no sound of branches breaking. Just that soft, rhythmic pacing. I nudged Liam's tent with my foot, trying to wake him without making too much noise. Nothing. He was a heavy sleeper. Chloe was in her own tent on the other side. I was on my own. I stared at the man. He just kept walking. He never came closer to our camp, but he never moved further away either. He was always at that same distance, always on the edge of the tree line. A shiver went down my spine. This was unnerving. This wasn't a lost hiker. This wasn't someone accidentally stumbling onto our camp. This was deliberate. This was someone watching us, waiting. I reached for my phone, thought about calling 911, but what would I say? There's a guy walking in a field, slowly, not doing anything. They'd think I was crazy. I decided to try something. I grabbed my powerful headlamp, switched it on, and pointed it directly at him. The beam cut through the darkness, a blinding white spear of light. It hit him dead on. He didn't stop walking. He didn't turn around. He just ducked his head, like he was trying to hide his face from the light without breaking his stride. His pace remained the same. Swish, 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 still circling. My hand started to shake. This was beyond creepy. This was terrifying. He knew we were watching him. He knew we could see him. And he didn't care. He just kept going. Like he was on a patrol. Like this was his job. I kept the light on him for a full minute, holding it steady, trying to get a better look at him. But he just kept his head down, moving in that slow, steady circle. I couldn't make out any features, just the shape of a man, dark and unmoving, except for his legs. Finally, I flicked the headlamp off. The darkness rushed back in, making the field seem even blacker. My eyes darted back to where he had been. He was still there, just a silhouette again, continuing his silent vigil. I pulled the tent flap closed, zipping it slowly, quietly. I lay back down, my heart still racing. I couldn't sleep. The image of the man, endlessly circling, was burned into my mind. I listened to every sound, every rustle, half expecting to hear him stop or come closer. But all I heard was the regular, soft, swish, swish sound for what felt like hours. The fear was different from anything I'd felt before. It wasn't the sudden jump scare kind of fear. It was a cold, creeping dread, the kind that settles deep in your bones. The kind that tells you something is profoundly wrong. It was the fear of being hunted, without knowing why, without knowing when the hunt would actually begin. I kept checking my phone. 2 a.m. 3 a.m. He was still out there. I could hear him. Always moving. Always circling. Around 4:00 a.m. The air was getting colder, and a faint gray light started to appear on the horizon, signaling the approaching dawn. The swish-swish sound finally, blessedly, stopped. I peered out again. The man was gone. The edge of the tree line was empty. I lay there, shivering, for another 30 minutes, until the sky was clearly lighter. Then, slowly, cautiously, I unzipped my tent and crawled out. Liam and Chloe were still asleep in their tents. The field was quiet, still. The morning air was crisp. It was like the night had never happened. But I knew it had. I walked over to Liam's tent, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering dread. I wanted to wake him, tell him what I'd seen, confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. But before I even touched his tent, I saw something. Tucked into the very bottom of the tent flap, just barely visible, was a single folded note. It was a piece of white paper, folded neatly into a small square. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly reached down, my fingers trembling, and pulled it out. It was folded tightly, obviously put there with care. I unfolded it. The handwriting was simple, block letters, not perfect, but legible. It read, "You snore, the other two don't." My vision swam. My stomach lurched. I gripped the paper so tight my knuckles turned white. My blood ran cold, then hot, then cold again. He had been so close. Close enough to put a note in my tent flap, close enough to hear me snoring. He had waited for us to sleep. He had watched us all night. And he had been right there, inches away. The words echoed in my mind. You snore. The other two don't. It wasn't just a simple observation. It was deeply personal. It meant he had listened. He had observed. He knew. And the implication was chilling. He knew who snored. He knew who didn't. He knew us. I quickly looked at Liam and Chloe's tents. No notes. Just mine. Why mine? Because I snored. Because he heard me. A new wave of terror washed over me, different from the initial fear. This was pure violation, an invasion. Someone had been watching, listening, categorizing us. And then left a message, just for me. I shoved the note into my pocket. I had to get them out of here. Now. I moved to Liam's tent and shook it hard. Liam, Chloe, wake up, we're leaving. Now. My voice was a harsh whisper, laced with urgency. They groaned, confused, but the fear in my voice must have cut through their sleep. They slowly unzipped their tents. What's going on? Liam mumbled, rubbing his eyes. We're leaving. Right now. No questions. Just pack. My voice was low, hard. They saw my face. They saw the wild look in my eyes. They didn't argue. We packed in absolute silence. No jokes, no complaints about the early hour. The silence in the field was deafening, amplified by the silent terror that gripped us. We moved quickly, efficiently, cramming everything into our bags without a word. Every rustle of a leaf, every distant bird call, made us jump. We kept glancing at the tree line, expecting to see him again, just standing there. My hands were shaking as I broke down my tent, the handprints from the note still fresh in my mind. I could still feel the cold dread of knowing he had been right there, listening, waiting. It took us maybe 20 minutes to get everything packed. We didn't even bother trying to make coffee or eat. We just threw our bags into the back of my truck. Get in, I whispered, my voice strained. We piled into the truck, and I started the engine. The sound was loud, jarring in the silent morning. I put it in gear, backed up, and drove slowly across the field towards the dirt road that led out. We didn't turn on the radio. The silence inside the cab was thick with unspoken fear. Liam and Chloe kept glancing at me, knowing something terrible had happened, but too afraid to ask. As we reached the dirt road and turned, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The field was empty. The tree line was dark. Nothing. But I knew he had been there. I knew he was still there, maybe watching us leave. I drove until the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the fields and forests we passed. I drove until we were hundreds of miles away, in a different state, pulled over at a busy truck stop with dozens of other people around us. Only then did I feel safe enough to stop. I pulled out the note from my pocket. It was still there, the words stark and chilling. You snore. The other two don't. I showed it to Liam and Chloe. Their faces went ashen. They finally understood. The silent man, the early morning packing, the terror in my eyes. We never went back to that field. We never camped in an open space like that again. The idea of being exposed, of being so easily watched, of having someone just wait for you to sleep, became a deep, visceral fear. We didn't talk about it much, not in detail. But the memory of that night, of the silent man circling in the dark, and the chilling message he left, it still haunts us. Because the scariest things aren't always monsters. Sometimes they're just people, and they're watching,